Good morning, everybody. Thanks for that. And I'm delighted to say that Frank and I are here this morning to talk about arguably what is one of the most important transport projects ever to grace the city of Edinburgh.
Well, possibly, yeah. You're talking about the project that was about 7 years late.
Yep. But it may have been slightly late, but now that we've got it, the whole city is thriving. Property prices are rising. Inward investment is booming. Look at the wonderful system that takes you straight from the airport to the heart of the city.
Yeah, no, it doesn't actually go anywhere where anyone wants it to go, does it? I don't think so.
It goes right to the heart of the city centre. It's fully accessible for wheelchairs, fully accessible for pushchairs.
Yeah, well, yeah. And was it 776 million? Does that ring a bell with anyone? Yeah.
Well.
And thank you. Actually, of course, that doesn't include the interest on the loan either. So it's probably about £1 billion, actually, Lesley.
Well, there is that.
Yeah, and it's slower than the bus as well. Correct?
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, it's slower than the bus. And if you go through the traffic, and if you get stuck at the traffic lights at the West End for a long time, that'll be the tram as well. So.
Anyway, what we can conclude from that is that absolutely the tram was certainly one of the most controversial projects to grace the streets of Edinburgh.
I should say, actually, I was just on holiday in Las Vegas, as a couple of you might know, and I went to Hoover Dam, which is fantastic, one of the great engineering wonders of the world. And the guy stood in front and he says, "Oh yes, Hoover Dam, look at the size of this thing." And 4 years it took to build Hoover Dam in 1935. Just saying. Anyway.
Well, there you go. As I was saying, it's certainly one of the most controversial transport projects to grace the city of Edinburgh. And now that we've got these lovely spanking new trams zooming down Princes Street every day, it's actually quite astonishing to think back and look at some of the hideous scenes of roadworks that actually graced the streets for so long, and actually thinking about hearts and minds. When you look at the history of the project, absolutely it went way over budget, absolutely it took longer than it should have done, but I think probably the thing that upset most people in Edinburgh was just the mess that it made of the streets and the inconvenience that caused, and the fact that it went on for much longer than it should have done. When you look at images like that, it's really not easy to see why people were so concerned and quite alienated from the tram project. However, the good news was that when I joined the council in the middle of August last year, start of August last year, as my boss told me at the interview, "Don't worry, it's all fine, it's back on track, all the deals have been done with the contractors, all you really need to do now is launch it." So, easier said than done, I guess. It's not really like pressing a button. Obviously, you have one of the most hated projects the council's ever carried out in the city, possibly the most hated, notorious. Beyond Edinburgh, you had comedians coming up at the Fringe every year, cracking jokes about the tram system. But all you have to do is launch it. Now, before I go any further, I just want to say that it was very much a team effort. I was lucky enough to join the council last year just when we were about to launch the project, but I had a lot of very dedicated colleagues in my team who'd been working on the project for some time, and when we got together to actually think through these launch plans, it's very much a team effort. Katie Spence, who's Transport Communications Manager, is with us today. I'm sure she'll be delighted to chat to you in the break if you want to talk to her about her real life experiences working on the tram project. Gareth Jones as well, who's now at Transport for Edinburgh. Very much a team, and of course Lesley Hines, Councillor Lesley Hines, leading the charge from the elected members' side. But it wasn't really like pressing a button. Actually, there was quite a few considerations that we had to take into account. Safety was obviously one of them. We were talking about behaviour change earlier. For the first time, we were going to have actual trams running down the city of Edinburgh, the city streets. People had to get used to that. They had to think about how they might behave differently. We had to help cyclists, walkers, families understand the potential dangers of the tram, but actually do that in a way that didn't scare them. We wanted trams to be something that people obviously wanted to use in the future, so that was a very big consideration. Also, there was going to be a testing period, and again, this is something when you look back now, it's almost incredible to think that this actually happened, that for weeks and weeks while the lines were being tested, we had trams running through the centre of Edinburgh, but without anybody actually able to get on them. So that was going to be a challenge as well. We had to help people actually understand where the tram went to, where it stopped, how they could use it, how they could integrate it with the bus system, and also how they actually would buy a ticket, how they would get on, and what their journey would feel like. So quite a few aspects to the launch, really. It wasn't just turning a tap on and off.
Okay.
We're going to look at some of the coverage from Frank's paper over the course of today. However, this has a special place in my heart because this was the paper that was published on the day of my first day of my new job as heading up communications for the City Council. And this lovely photograph of the sleeping tram workers of Shandwick Place. Don't look at it too closely because it's not a particularly savoury picture. But as it landed on my desk, I thought to myself, well, firstly, is it too late to phone the recruitment consultant and change my mind? But secondly, more realistically, I thought that is a very interesting example of how high profile this project was. And this photograph wasn't taken by a reporter or a snapper from Frank's paper. It was taken by someone who lived in the area and who was so disgusted to see these tram workers taking a break when they should have been working full tilt to get the project up and running, that they sent the photograph into the evening news and they decided to put it on the front page. So I thought, that's interesting, and it then sparked a debate, actually, and we can have that debate here as well, is it the right thing that actually that becomes a story, or actually is it the right thing that these poor tram workers are actually allowed a lunch break on the hottest day of the year? And what are the reputational issues that are involved in that? So
yeah, we could have a long discussion about that. Whether that was, but I think that shows where the project was, because from my perspective, absolutely, should people be allowed a lunch break? Well, of course. Are they having a lunch break? Yes, they probably are. But such was the antagonism towards the tram project that somebody looking out their window taking that, was so infuriated would send that in. And that, for me, was a reputation issue for the trams, because you couldn't have people sitting around in the middle of town like that, because people were just going to get annoyed. If it had been another project that had been going on time, yeah, people wouldn't have cared about it. But for the tram project, such was the level of anger and difficulty at this point when Lesley took over. So I think that gives you an idea of how bad things were when you started.
Very interesting. So what it did tell me was that absolutely we had to be very clear about stakeholder engagement, and today we're going to talk mainly about media engagement and how that drove some of the behaviour change and the attitude change towards the tram. But safe to say, as in any project, there are various stakeholders, and I think what this project showed to me is that it's not always as simple as arrows connecting the council straight out with their separate stakeholders, and I think people in here will be aware that stakeholders quite often speak to each other without the council's involvement, and very often speak to the media. And then the first you hear about it is when you get the call saying, we've got some great pictures. So very important to think about, how do you message to all of these parties? What's the timing of that messaging? Are they hearing the same thing from the council? If they're not if they're hearing different things, then obviously that needs to be addressed. But first and foremost, I think the media piece for me, and that was the question that we had at the end of the last session, how do you fit media into all of this? For me, media is actually arguably the most important part, because actually it magnifies and amplifies the messages that you're sending out to the other stakeholders. But consistency is absolutely key within that, and essential to get it right. So, media dialogue. I mean, there'd be media experts in the room. My original job was as a media officer, so I was very clear on what we need to do with media. But although in nowadays we talk a lot about behaviour change, we talk about social media, we talk about loads of things like that. I mean, getting back to basics, this is a very practical exercise in how to use the media and work with the media to try and change attitudes towards trams in the city. How did we do that? Well, from my perspective, it was very much about having an honest and open conversation at many levels. So, in week one of my job, post sleeping tram workers, I phoned up Frank, introduced myself, and we've been speaking regularly ever since. We had an ongoing dialogue about the project and the timeline of that, the difficulties that we were encountering. I've been quite upfront about that, and also looking at the milestones to come in the project. But clearly my team as well, we're constantly speaking to the transport correspondent, evening news at that level. You're obviously speaking to councillors at the same time, so there's an ongoing dialogue there. But it's very much, I think, for me, about building an element of trust, so you can be honest and open with your journalist contacts and really build a story that is of interest to their readers. So timing and relationships are key as well, but very much about content as well. And everybody should have a really good understanding about the publications that they're targeting, what makes the readers tick, what are they going to be interested in. And throughout the rest of this particular presentation, we're going to look at some of the content that we try to put forward to the Evening News and other media titles to really bring the project to life and really change attitudes towards trams.
I think just to add to that, trust is absolutely key. There was a change in attitude when Lesley came on board the council. As you can see there was that story, but we'll show some previous front pages a bit later on, and there was, long before I was editor as well, there's been a whole series of negative stories about the tram project. Probably pretty valid, given that it's our tax pounds and it's a lot of money has been misspent. So there's a lot of fear about the media, and I think it would be quite easy for communications professionals to get in a bunker and think, but I've got, I need to go here, and they're printing that stuff. But I think what Lesley brought, and also Lesley Hines too, was a fact, well, actually, you had a perspective, I think, that, well, this is my pounds as well, and I understand why you're writing this. So once you get that attitude, then we can come and have a dialogue, and actually we can have a dialogue about the story about the seals, and actually you can say, well, okay, I can see why that's a story, and we can start building trust, and we can start communicating properly. And I think there was a real sea change, and that has helped change the attitude going down the line.
Absolutely. So in the project, we're really clear, we had to give Frank and his team an indication of where the project was actually going. We're approaching the time where we could be clear about launch, and this is a really great example coming up of the power of an exclusive. So we knew that readers would be keen to understand, when are the trams going to come on track. So we're able to come out and quite boldly say, actually, here's what's going to happen. We, with council, are committing to having the streets clear of roadworks by the end of October. We think there'll be the first tram into Princes Street on a testing basis by Christmas, and we're pretty clear that there's going to be some sort of tram service up and running by May of next year. So obviously within the project we went through a lot of discussion that we were absolutely clear that if we were giving out this type of deadline, it wouldn't be missed. Because clearly it's a hostage to fortune, and then some of the points made earlier, that is when comms absolutely has to be at the centre of decision making, and helping the people in the room understand that, of course, while there was pressure to come out and give dates, the worst thing you could possibly done is give dates that couldn't then be delivered on. So we were clear that that was the direction of travel that we needed to take. We briefed Frank's team, and this was a fabulous front page in terms of helping change attitudes towards the tram as well. I think it was about maybe just putting aside the fact that the roadworks and the project difficulties and the contractors and so on that had perhaps hindered the project, and actually saying, well, once this is all over, there will actually be a tram service for us all to use, and it will make Edinburgh a better place, and it will make travel to the airport easier.
Again, one thing I think is worth adding here, maybe I can't speak for every editor in Scotland, but yes, we have a role to hold public sector bodies to account to ensure that money isn't misspent. But we also have a role, I think, to ensure that things that happen in our city and region are actually working well. We're also cheerleaders. I think we should be. And so there's part of what we do is we want this to be a success simply because, it's going to happen, it's going to be spent. So I don't really have an interest in the tram project failing. Yes, I have an interest in ensuring it's the best it can be. So the very fact that Lesley's coming with some positive messages to me, well, I'm open to that because I think it's important that the city and region, whether it's for trams or health or whatever, that it's doing well. So I think you tapped into that very, very well. And I was keen to run stories like this if they were available. And the very fact is that you didn't say, oh, we hate the news, they print lots of negative stuff. You opened up, you came to us with the story in advance and work together, and this is the kind of results.
Absolutely, and I think as well, I think it's worth mentioning, it's the opportunity of local newspapers that are there as well. So people are very keen to go sometimes straight to broadcast or straight to social media with stories, but actually, the Evening News has actually I've lost count of the number of stories that you've broken, and they've then been followed up by national press, broadcast press, Daily Mail nationally and so on, not just on Tram but on a whole load of other things as well. So, and it's important to bear in mind the timing of local newspapers as well. So the evening news hits the streets at 11 o'clock. That's quite a different time cycle to some of the more traditional forms of, you know, giving people stories the night before and so on. And that can really be helpful when you're planning actually how to manage news and issue information. So to try and give the content that we thought would change people's attitudes, so we wanted people to stop thinking about roadworks and thinking about horrible dug-up trenches and so on. We wanted to talk about the people behind the project. So we did quite a lot of work with Tom Norris, who's the General Manager of Edinburgh Trams, putting him forward as a media spokesperson, a fresh voice, a fresh face, the man who's actually essentially running the tram service, and that provided quite a lot of content and so on for the media as well. But very importantly as well, we looked beyond the management, the suits, and looked at the actual people who were bringing the project to life. So this tweet here is from the first tram test, which went into the centre of town overnight in November. And during that project, we actually put together a kind of team of Twitter reporters from the press team who are out there tweeting every particular juncture. So we're actually providing our own newsfeed as alongside everybody else's. But basically, these guys are measuring, you know, how's the tram fitting on the tracks and so on. So it's kind of trying to help people understand why these tests had to be done, you know, what actually was going on, what the actual guys were doing. And that's interesting to a lot of people. It's particularly interesting to a segment of society that we uncovered, which are tram enthusiasts, in the same way that you get train spotters. So tram spotters were really interested in this project, and some of them came from all over Europe to get on the first tram of the day. And this was one of my favourite tweets of the whole campaign. This was, again, on the same night where we had the first tram running into Princes Street overnight. This was the first guy, the driver, who was going to be the guy to drive the first tram, and we interviewed him in the evening news as well, Billy Adams, the youngest trainee driver. And we tweeted at the fact that he was actually putting a full Windsor tie knot in his tie that night because he felt it was such an auspicious occasion. So again, bringing that personalities to life, telling everybody about how excited they were to be part of the project. And people can't help but respond to that. You know, if you give people the human face of a project, they can't help but respond back.
Interesting, the time of the tweet there as well, 11:19 p.m.
Yes, absolutely. Safety was key for us, and we created a number of safety materials. You would have seen the lamppost wraps up and down Princes Street saying the trams are coming and so forth. We did videos which we shared on YouTube and online. But very important was Exercise Salvador. So that was a kind of dry run for big events taking place at Murrayfield Stadium. We knew that one of the early events, once the tram was up and running, was going to be the One Direction concert. So we wanted to test how crowds would respond and how we would run a tram service to help support a big event like that happening in the city. So rather than doing that behind closed doors or kind of trying to keep the safety aspect hush-hush, the team came up with the idea of actually making it a public event. And obviously we needed volunteers to come along and be part of that. So we put the call out via the evening news as well as social media for people to sign up to Exercise Salvador, hoping that we'd get, you know, a few hundred volunteers. In actual fact, we had over 1,000 people signed up within the first 24 hours, which was a fantastic result, beyond our expectations, but also just showed us that actually there was an emerging enthusiasm from people for the tram system. And we encouraged them to get involved on the day, tweet their thoughts and comments, and really it became quite a big event in the end, and very much open to the media as well. Your guys were there reporting on that as well. So again, just bringing people inside the project. Don't think roadworks, don't think safety is a bad thing. Think about, look, how great is it going to be when we've got this tram up and running for a big major event like this. Yes, social media, what a great part of the campaign. That was one of the most fun parts of it, was the hashtags that Katie and Gareth were able to think up for the campaign. So tram spotting was an obvious one, but that did help when people were seeing trams going up and down the streets and nobody on them but testing. But they were snapping pictures of them and posting them with hashtag tram spotting. Hashtag ding ding. Well, why not? If you're getting on a tram, ding ding. There's a tram, ding ding. Let's get excited. The trams are coming. You know, who could resist hashtag ding ding? Safety. So careful now. Hashtag careful now. That was Katie's idea, straight out of Father Ted. If you're a fan of Father Ted. So we talked about that a little bit actually with the reference to the previous comments. So, you know, is that a bit kind of light-hearted for safety? But actually we wanted to get the message across, so we did it in that way, and people picked up on it. It was really well used. Hashtag ready to roll once we were ready to launch. So absolutely ready to roll fantastic, and very touch of genius, I have to say, on tram selfie. So everybody that got on a tram in the first weekend, the first few weeks, we're encouraging them to take an on-tram selfie and share that. So people were seeing that on social media and wanting to be part of it and wanting to get on a tram and share their on-tram selfies. So very powerful part of the campaign.
A lot of these things are quite small, but I think you've got to remember this is a project that had absolutely no good news really for several years. So the idea that 1,000 people signed up in 24 hours to take part, I mean, that's a big deal. The fact that people were tweeting positive things with hashtags, I mean, that in itself is transformational. And I think for us, we knew that there was a constituency of people in our readership who wanted this to be a success, who wanted to be part of it. So we wanted to kind of push that. But one thing I think is worth saying is that when it comes to the media, while we were supportive, we had to ensure, and we've always got to ensure, that we are almost in the same place as our readers. So even if I'd been a tram spotter, which I'm not, but even if I had been a tram spotter, I couldn't push this too far ahead of what where our readers are, where the taxi drivers of Edinburgh are, you know, if you like, because otherwise then people stop trusting what they see in the paper. So while we can be positive and we can support what's happening, we can't be too far ahead, otherwise we're seen not to be credible.
Absolutely. So a bit more social media. We took advantage of the fact that Irvin Welsh is a tram fan, so we approached him via social media and he was soon tweeting his enthusiasm for the project, which was quite influential. We did things like take a tram driver's view of the route into town, put that on LinkedIn and other sites, people could share that. And as I say, at key events, big moments, we had media officers out there being Twitter journalists, so we had media officers there to manage and help and assist with the press that were there, but we had Twitter journalists just feeding our moments on social media. So that is the 5 a.m. to York Place, the first paying tram to go into town, and that was the shot as they opened the doors and people piled on. So what a joyous moment that was. So the launch was very important. We were really keen not to strike too much of a celebratory note. Everybody knew this had not been one of Edinburgh's finest hours, but we wanted obviously to launch the tram in a way that people bought into. So we very much took a community approach to the launch. This is the whole tram team getting ready to roll there. That photo was shared on social media. We did tram roadshows to let people get on board and actually look around a tram before they actually got on a moving tram. There's some of the ticket servicing assistants. And you know, there was talk about, do you want pipe bands? Do you want, what sort of approach do you want to the launch? We rejected all of that, but we were approached by one of Edinburgh's crowd flash mob choirs who were desperate to get involved, and so we couldn't say no to them, and they provided a bit of crowd kind of sourcing of entertainment on the day. And what did that result in? As I said, 5 a.m. to York Place was mobbed all weekend. The trams were mobbed. 40,000 people rode on the trams in the first weekend. 130,000 people in the first week, and in the first month over 500,000 people. So that is a good news story as far as we're concerned, and we're looking to keep up the momentum in the months ahead. So that's really all I had to say. Do you have anything else to add on that, Frank?
No, just I think that I think it's just to reiterate the point about Lesley and her team really reached out and understood what the role of the paper was, trusted us with information in advance, brought us on board. A lot of the stuff was quite complex. You know, why are these trams going around for weeks and weeks, as I say, with no one on them, for example? How can that possibly be? And if you take sort of limited bits of information, it's quite easy for that information to be misunderstood and to end up as a negative story. And actually what happened all through this project was an awful lot of one-to-one meetings with me and my team where things were explained in full. So we actually understood the context. And we couldn't actually print it at that point, so effectively we've been briefed in advance, trusted with that information, and then told later on, okay, we're ready to release that information. But because we had the full picture, we were then able to present a full picture. Now, actually, there's a lot of positive stories here, which Lesley's put on. There was some negative stories through this, of course there was.
Of course there.
But I do hope that everything that we print had a balance to it and had a context to it. And the reason for that is because of the trust that was placed in my team through the relationship that Lesley and her team built up with my journalist. And I think that was extremely important in helping turn around the attitude of the paper towards the trams, and probably the more important thing, as John was referring to earlier, is the attitude and behaviour of ordinary people in the city and region towards the trams.